Hello, everyone. We're just about 2 minutes out from the webinar, Lone Workers Understanding and Managing Risk with Nicole Vazques and Kristen Gasser. As a reminder, if you guys would like to ask any questions, you can do so at any point by selecting the GoToWebinar panel and selecting the questions drop-down. Make sure to submit your questions to all panelists. Again, we're going to get started in a couple minutes. We still have some people trickling in, so we're going to give them a couple more minutes to get situated. And we will get started at 12 p.m. Eastern. Thank you. All right, thank you for joining us today, everyone, for our latest Expert Insights webinar, Lone Workers Understanding and Managing Risk, with Nicole Vazques and Kristen Gasser from Worthwhile Training. So, as a reminder, if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask, you can do so by selecting the questions drop-down in your GoToWebinar panel. Put your questions in the text box and make sure you submit them to all panelists. At the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session that we will be taking questions from this section from. As a reminder, we will also be recording this entire session. So if for any reason you have to drop off or you have colleagues that have missed it, we will be sending those out to anyone who registered for the webinar, and you can share the link with whoever you'd like. In addition, if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can do so by following us at Everbridge. With that said, I'd like to introduce our two speakers today, Nicole and Kristen. First up is Nicole Vazques. She is the founder of the UK-based company Worthwhile Training and has over 20 years of experience in assisting organizations with practical advice to manage the risk associated with employee safety, security, and well-being. She is the author of many training courses and manuals on personal safety and lone working and has supported countless managers and frontline staff. The training program she wrote on managing violence and aggression in the workplace for the railway sector is used as an industry standard in the UK. Kristen Gasser, who is originally from Boston, now works with Nicole, designing and presenting learning experiences that actively engage participants and provide targeted, practical solutions that address organizations' concerns around safety, around issues of safety, well-being, lone working, and conflict management. Kristen also has a background in television production and theater and uses this to good effect in facilitating Worthwhile Training's immersive drama-based workshops that both challenge and affirm participants, helping them to solve problems and test skills in a safe environment. As well as working with a wide variety of organizations to implement and embed controls and effective training solutions, Worthwhile Training runs the yearly Lone Worker Safety Expo in London, which brings together experts and organizations who share their passion for keeping people safe and businesses compliant. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to our speakers today, Nicole and Kristen. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks a lot. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Kristen, and I'll be talking with my colleague Nicole Vazques today, asking her to outline for you some of the key issues around the topic of lone working. I'm hoping to provide you with a helpful overview. We're going to look at strategies for assessing and controlling the risks associated with lone working, and we're going to give you a bit of guidance about setting up effective policies and procedures. And as Michael said, we're happy to take your questions, perhaps even along the way. So, we'll leave room at the end for your questions, but please feel free to put them in at any time in that question box, and we'll try and address them when we can. So let me hand over to Nicole. Nicole, try to set the scene for us. Lone working.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I'm going to apologise because I have a very British cold, so if I'm a little bit nasally, I apologise for that, but I'll try and keep my voice going for you this afternoon. So as Kristen said, we're going to have a look at these questions this afternoon and hopefully give you a bit of an overview. One of the first things that we thought we ought to look at was this idea of how we actually define a lone worker. And when I was looking at doing this webinar for your audience as opposed to a UK audience, I thought I'd be interested to see what the statistics say about the number of lone workers across the US. And I found this statistic, according to Berg Insight, 53 million lone workers. Obviously, that's across the United States, Canada, and Europe. But it just goes to show how many people actually lone work. Although we find that a real challenge when we're working with organisations looking at lone working, because there's not a real understanding always of what that phrase means. And I think these pictures probably explain to you why. If you think about the kinds of jobs and roles that people do, they are so varied, from people who work in kind of retail environments through to forestry, maybe service delivery. They may well be doing more kind of industrial, technical work that people may do. They may be welcome when they're working with their clients, or there may be jobs that they're doing where clients don't want to see them. There's so many different varieties of lone workers that actually in itself it's a really challenging phrase.
It can be a bit eye-opening when you start realizing how many different jobs require at least some component of lone working. You may not lone work all the day, but you may have times when you're a lone worker. And it affects many employees across many different sectors and diverse organizations, as Nicole said. So that makes me curious to find out how you define a lone worker. What is it? If there are many different kinds of lone workers, how do you define one? What is it?
Okay, well, it's something that we've asked organisations that we work with, and I thought I'd share with you some of the examples of definitions that they've used. The first one talks about people who work alone for quite a significant period of their day or their week. And of course, the challenge with that is that sometimes people might only lone work maybe first thing in the morning, or maybe they're covering for lunch breaks or at the end of the day when everybody else has gone home. And so it forgets those people. The second one I like is because it talks about mobile employees, remote workers who are away from their base. But again, there is kind of the omission there of those people who are left alone in their building, which is the third definition. So the last definition, I think, is the closest that I've seen within organisations, where this talks about being out of sight or sound of another colleague, but none of those really summarise what the official definition is. And again, when we were looking at research for this US webinar, I looked at what OSHA was saying, and what I discovered was that there isn't actually an OSHA definition of lone working. There are several states that defined lone working in guidance notes. For example, we found that Washington State Department of Labour, they put a definition out there which is very, very close to the UK definition, which our Health and Safety Executive used. It talks about those people who work without close or direct supervision. So that's really important that you have that definition in there to start with.
Excellent. So now that makes me curious to find out how many people here today have already begun to think about addressing this issue. Can we take a poll? Let's take a poll. Do you have already a clearly defined, written, and communicated definition of lone workers for your organization?
So Mike's just sending this poll out to you guys, and perhaps if you could press really quickly, we can see what answers are coming in quickly.
This is interesting. We've got an overwhelming majority saying no, 93%. I don't have a clearly defined definition for lone workers. 8% have yes. Okay. So that's interesting. Okay, we've got a lot of people who are interested, obviously, in this topic and thinking about, okay, what do I have to do now?
Okay, so let's move on then if we can. Thanks, Mike. Hopefully go back to the slides. Great. So this is another question that we get asked. Is it okay to loan work? Well, that would be a crazy question because we're doing a loan worker
So
webinar.
many people already are loan working.
Yeah. So generally, it is okay to loan work. And in fact, in the US, the legislation is very similar to the UK. There are certain areas where you're not allowed to work. For example, if you're doing specific work in confined spaces, firefighting, nuclear stuff, which is, you know, I'm quite glad that people aren't allowed to do that on their own.
The risks are so high, we're not going to let people do this on their own.
Absolutely. But even then, when you kind of say, okay, look, there's no specific legislation, or very little specific legislation that says don't loan work, you then have to start saying, well, there is still a general duty of care under the law. And for the US, that would be the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. That gives that kind of broad sort of idea of general duty of care. So if you start looking at loan working, it's not just saying, is it okay to loan work or not? It's kind of, when is it okay to loan work? And certainly from our experience, there are certain high risk activities that might not be suitable. And there might be some industry standards and guidelines. And again, I did find several references to standards in the US where loan working is not acceptable. I think there was some guidance there from the electric power generators and transmission and distribution standards, which is a very long, wordy kind of piece of documentation. But it kind of really sets out for them exactly what we're saying. High-risk activities aren't suitable. But then for everything else, it's up to an organisation to decide for themselves through risk assessments whether they think it's okay to do that. Now, in the UK, if you look at this very bottom point on the slide, in the UK, we talk about this idea that loan workers should be at no greater risk than other employees. But actually, that's a really big ask of organisations. If I've got people out there doing this work, how do I control it so that they're just as safe as if there's maybe one or two or even a team of people? And actually, that is quite challenging for organisations to get to that point.
Well, we should talk about some of these specific risks. Why is it a challenge that loan workers aren't at any greater risk than people maybe who work amongst others?
No, it's a good point, Kristen. So look, we know that there are specific risks to loan workers that are increased either in terms of the likelihood of an incident occurring or in terms of the severity of an incident, the harm, if you like, if an incident were to occur. And some of these might even actually increase both sides. So for example, if you look at physical violence and assault, the top bullet point there, we know from experience that the level of physical violence or assault is definitely potentially going to be increased because somebody's on their own. And in fact, even the OSHA guidance on workplace violence says in their fact sheet that lone working is one of the risk factors. They recognise that as something they have to address. So we know that that's something where both the likelihood and the severity of harm could be increased. And that's really about there not being somebody there to call for help and support and backup. Another one on that list is about whether somebody has potential for sudden illness or there's an emergency. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that's more likely if somebody's on their own, but we are suggesting that if somebody is taken ill through an emergency, where again there's nobody to raise the alarm, there's nobody to give them support and backup.
Or CPR.
No, absolutely, yeah, to administer first aid. You know, that injury could become worse. So any of those things potentially could be made worse in that kind of situation. And even when we look at this one where it says involvement of major incidents or terrorist attacks, again, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that that's more likely when you're on your own. And in fact, even for the lone worker, I'm not sure it's going to be more severe.
Right.
But then when we start thinking about the impacts on the business, that can be very different. If I have somebody out there in the field, I've no idea whether they're okay or not in those kind of horrible incidents, then that can have a massive impact on the organisation. And I think organisations really do need to consider the risks to the bigger, wider organisation, not just to lone workers. So if you look at this list, this kind of gives you an idea of the sorts of things that businesses ought to be thinking about when they consider the risk to the organisation. Business interruption is the first one, obviously. And that's just the pure case of, you know, well, look, well, somebody's gone missing, somebody's been harmed, somebody's been hurt. We've got to go through the investigation costs. We've got to make sure that they're okay. We need to cover any illness and sickness. We get other people to do the jobs that they're supposed to be doing because they're not there. You know, all of that costs money. And I've already mentioned investigation costs, but potential prosecution and litigation. I don't know what the situation would be in the US in terms of being prosecuted, but there certainly have been cases in the UK where people have been prosecuted, where people have been injured whilst lone working.
I mean, that makes me think of that really tragic case of the company of Southwest Water, where a man was lone working and he died. Yeah, no one was there, and it was huge impact on obviously him, but also the business.
Yeah, I mean, if you look down the list, the damage to brand and reputation is also huge. So Southwest Water, a water supplier, utility supplier in the UK, had somebody who very tragically died while they were out inspecting a water filtration unit. And, you know, you look at all of these and you think, yes, it is the real sad case of somebody and somebody's family being affected. And it is also the impact that that has on a business. So we need to really recognise that when we're talking about lone worker risk, we know it's the business that gets affected as well as the individual. So thinking about that and thinking about kind of the considerations before I would allow somebody to lone work, I think there are some key points here. The first one that, you know, we always talk to organisations about is kind of setting your core values and limits. When is it okay to lone work? When are we comfortable that that is a risk we are willing to run? And then once we've done that, we can go through the rest of this list here. And, you know, the people on the webinar can read all of these things, and if they've got questions on any of them, they can ask. But I think kind of pulling out a couple of the key things, we're going to go through those in a minute or two, so we'll do that. I thought I'd share with the group actually the values that we had from one organisation.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, so these are core values from one of our clients that we work with. And the first thing that they say is that actually, if at all possible, and that's both in terms of safety and in terms of resources and finances, we will avoid lone working. Now, of course, the challenge we've got is why there are so many lone workers in the world at the moment is because money is tight. For lots of organisations, budgets are getting cut, finance is getting tighter, and it's cheaper to put one person in a situation than it is to put 2, 3 or a team. So we recognise that for some people that's not
and of course the way of a lot of businesses nowadays is that people are working from home. Perhaps you are managing people who are working at various different locations. It's just the way the world is changing.
Absolutely. Flexible working, you know, that really does make a difference to people lone working. So look, this is a great kind of ideal and a great ethos and a core value. We will avoid it where possible. But do you know what? If we have to do it, we're only going to allow it for low risk activities.
And then, of course, you have to identify, well, what's low risk? What's low risk enough?
Absolutely. So what they say is we'll do a specific risk assessment. And part of that specific risk assessment is saying that we will actually only allow this when it's a competent person. And they've got this great definition of what they mean by competent. And I like the bit that they say it's where it's the ability to deal with circumstances that are new, unusual, or beyond the scope of training. But you and I go out and deliver lone working training. It's what we do. It's the core of our business. However, we absolutely recognise that you cannot train people for every potential situation. So they have to have some level of, well, if you want to call it common sense, that would do, but experience, capabilities, whatever phrases you want to use. But the idea is they're saying, look, we need people that we trust and that we feel are okay to go out and do this job. And of course, beyond that, they talk about these lines of communication and emergency protocols and responses that are not only tested by the organisation, but trusted clearly by the individuals themselves.
Excellent, excellent summary. Now, look, let's move on to the second point of things to consider, which was to understand the full extent of the risks. Let's talk about assessing risks.
Okay, so there is a need to assess risk. And again, if you look at kind of the legislation in the US, it talks about this general duty to keep a workplace free from recognised hazards. Well, to me, straight away, that suggests that if you're going to say recognised hazards, you have to identify and assess those hazards. So, and if they're likely to cause death or serious physical harm, that's the kind of thing that we should be avoiding. So if we're going to say you should do a risk assessment, and I think sometimes they're called job hazard analysis as well, so risk assessments or job hazard analysis, I'm going to just give you a few words of advice. I'm going to say you need to involve your workers. If, for example, I've got a salesperson that's going out and travelling, maybe driving a car, staying in hotels, going into other people's homes maybe even, they know what the job is. But if I'm sitting in HR or back at head office, I might not understand completely their risks. So it's important to involve them in the process and to get that buy-in and that knowledge that they have. I think the next two are really about kind of getting the balance right. It's about making sure that we don't go too far with the risk, that we don't let our imagination kind of get carried away with. And we call these quite often those Hollywood moments. You know, the kind of things that you see in the films, but really they only ever happen in the films. Well, don't worry about those. You don't have to put those into a risk assessment. You should only be thinking about those reasonably foreseeable risks. And if a risk were to happen, if an event were to happen, how much harm would it give that person? What we're saying is only consider those significant harm events. So if it's small events with small insignificant harm, you don't need to worry about it. But the one piece of advice that I think a lot of organisations miss out on is reviewing them. You know, often we'll see risk assessments that are maybe 3-4 years old, and I think I'm not convinced that their lone workers are doing exactly the same job that they were doing 3 or 4 years ago.
And that those risks have stayed exactly the same over 3 or 4 years.
Exactly that. So we need to do it. But the last point I would say, and this always confuses people, is I'm going to suggest that you don't actually do lone worker risk assessments.
No lone worker risk assessments.
No.
So what do we do if we don't do lone worker risk assessments?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that what we should be doing is task-based risk assessments. And those task-based risk assessments are really important because of the jobs that we identified earlier on. I mean, if you look just at these photographs of the kind of jobs that people do, you can see straight away I couldn't possibly do a risk assessment that would cover all of these jobs. I'd have to look at the jobs individually and just think about how does the lone working element kind of impact on the level of risk. Exactly. So it's task-based, job-based risk assessments.
So this is where we developed a risk assessment tool that focused you specifically on the jobs that people were doing. It's a way of engaging people and looking at all the key factors that could potentially be a risk. And we've called it PET 2. Now, we used to have a PET, but PET 2 is the new one. I think we've used this since 2000. And a lot of businesses in the UK have adopted this as a helpful tool to kind of engage the lone worker and assess what risks might be out there, and we're looking at it through various lenses, and when you add those together it gives you kind of an overview of all the risks, and it points you, of course, if you can identify, don't forget, if you can identify the risks, as maybe multiple risks, you put those together, it points to, well, how am I going to control for those risks? So it's a way of, if you can identify the problems, then you're halfway there to providing solutions. So, and it also, just a point, you can do it in advance, create formal risk assessments that you present out to your workers, or you empower them by using this tool to be able to do dynamic risk assessments in the moment. I'm here at the doorstep, I'm going to ring the doorbell and, you know, help this person inside because I'm a nurse practitioner or something. Well, are there risk factors that I'm noticing? PET 2 hopefully will help you kind of create these and communicate them. So let's review it. What is PET 2?
Okay, so thanks, Kristen. That was a good introduction to this. Let's just go through it. PET, each letter of PET stands for a couple of words, so 2 words for each letter, and it's PET 2. So P is person and people. So the first thing is around whether it's the lone worker themselves that might create an issue, or whether it's the people that they're coming into contact with. So, for example, if we look at the lone worker, have they got any medical issues that might actually increase their level of risk? So say, for example, you had somebody who suffered from diabetes or even from epilepsy or had heart condition. At that point, I'd be considering whether it is suitable and whether I need to put in extra controls before I let this person lone work. And of course, that will depend on the job that they do. So we go back, we're actually identifying the job as well. Their experience and confidence. Quite often people think that that means, you know, the more experience, the more confidence, the safer they are. But actually in reality, we know that something else creeps in with experience and confidence, and that's complacency. So sometimes people being experienced and confident actually makes them less safe because they would go a little bit further maybe because of that complacency that's there. If you look at the people that they come into contact with, it's not just about whether you know them or not, although obviously that's really important, because if you look down the list, it's things like history of violence and aggression, drug and alcohol, mental health issues, I might not know that about somebody if they are complete strangers to the business. But it's also about whether they are willing or reluctant.
Explain that, because of course that makes a lot of difference. Am I happy to see the lone worker when they show up?
Okay, so I'll give you an example then. Imagine you're a healthcare worker that's going out to somebody else's home to provide that healthcare. Then most people will be glad to see you. So they're a willing participant in the process. On the other hand, if your role is to go out and to repossess goods, then actually I'm going to be a reluctant participant in that process. So you can see how straight away that will change the dynamics in a situation.
And the possibility of risk.
Absolutely.
Changes.
So moving on to the E then, this is about environment and equipment, and it's about whether those two things could pose a risk, or the lack of equipment might pose a risk, for example. But if we think about environment for a start, just something really simple, rural or isolated areas may therefore be a problem with communication. So mobile phone or cell phone signal might not be as good in those areas. So that could be a concern for the lone worker. And again, we talked about the first aid issue earlier. There's nobody around. If I have a fall, how do I get help and support? How far away from me is that first aid or emergency response? So that could be a challenge. The last one on this list talks about unfamiliar or high-profile areas. So it could be that the worker's going into a situation that they've never been to before, or it could be that they're going into an area that is what we call high profile. It may be a building that could be a target for all sorts of reasons. I know in the past we've had issues in the UK with animal rights groups, for example, with certain buildings where animal testing takes place. Well, if you've got somebody travelling in that area or even going to that building as a salesperson or a visitor for whatever reason, they could get caught in some kind of protest. So there's something there about the environment being an impact. And then, of course, it's also about the equipment, not just about whether it's suitable and appropriate, but also, if you look down there, that last one about kind of means of communication, have I got the right tools for communication in these circumstances? Would I be able to use my phone to call for help and support and backup if, for example, I was faced with somebody being really angry and aggressive in front of me? Actually taking my phone out to make a call might be inappropriate in those circumstances.
Exactly.
So it might also be the robbery, the target for robbery or theft. You know, if I've given somebody a great new, tablet or a laptop and they're carrying it through in an environment, so we're linking the equipment to the environment, then actually it might make me more of a target in a specific area. So moving on then to the T is about task and triggers, and really what we do with those is pull the two together and we say, well, what is it about the activity that might create a risk? And most of these are really obvious. We've talked about security and protecting roles, enforcing a rule or behaviour, but actually the last one is a lot more subtle. Some instances you may have workers who are dealing with clients and having to ask either difficult, sensitive questions or discussing sensitive issues or delivering bad news. Even that health worker that I said earlier on might be okay in a welcome visitor. They might not be if they've come to give bad news, and therefore that changes the dynamics. And not even just with the client, it could be a member of their family that's there that doesn't take well to the news. So you start to see how these things can be pulled together.
Yeah. So hopefully, people have a sense of looking at this, how to identify, and also you can interlock these different types of risks to build a more comprehensive risk profile with the pet too. So let's do another poll now and ask you, how confident are you that you have risk assessments for lone working tasks that are, that consider kind of all these issues, the P's, the E's, and the T's? I'm guessing maybe if people aren't, if you could run that poll now, Mike, that would be great. Are you confident or not? I'm guessing that if we've had people who don't have a lone working definition, they may not have considered all the risks and created risk assessments and a tool for them. And, in fact, I've got 91% saying no. Or 90% no, 10% yes. It's flashing.
Yeah, it's flashing. But it's around that 90% saying no and about 10% saying yes, that they have considered all those issues. And you're right, because there is a direct correlation then between the first question around have we defined lone workers. So if we haven't defined lone workers, we probably haven't defined all of their risks.
Right.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. That's really great. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got this tool, PET2, to identify these risks. let's talk about how now, if I've identified risks, how do I control for them?
Okay, so how do you control the risks? Well, I'm going to go right back to that client rule in the first place, which was about, you know, we don't do it unless it's absolutely necessary. But it's a little bit further than that. For a lot of organisations, what we talk about is deciding on our stopping rules. When would we not allow it? If we're going to say on one hand we do allow it and define it and do risk assessments of it, by default we also ought to be discovering when we wouldn't allow lone working to happen. So, for example, I might do a PET analysis, a formal risk assessment, and I might decide the person is not experienced or confident enough, they don't have the right equipment, and actually then they're not even sure that this task is something that can be done safely by one person. So I would just say as an organisation, stop, we don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you said earlier on about this idea that it's not just formal risk assessment, it's also dynamic risk assessment.
Yes, by the employee, the lone worker themselves.
Absolutely. So as a dynamic risk assessment, the individual might think, well, I'm happy, I feel confident, I don't know much about the person I'm going out to see. Actually, I know a little bit about the environment and it doesn't instill me with confidence. And the task I'm about to do could lead to a trigger. It could lead to a potential for a risk for me, whatever that might be. But what we're saying is to a lone worker, if in those circumstances you don't feel 100% happy to continue, then at that point you should be stopping and you shouldn't be continuing that process. Now, I'm not sure we've got this as a poll. Mike, have we got this as a poll? I'm hoping we have, because I'd be interested to know whether people thought that their lone workers would be okay and that they would feel confident. Great, okay, so lone workers, would they be clear on the stopping rules and would they be confident using them?
All right. It looks like we're about 50-50, half and half. I mean, it is interesting to think that, you know, PET2 or these other kind of risk assessment tools, it gives both employers and employees that framework to identify and communicate risks to each other, both formally and informally, and it can be really effective. But don't forget that it relies on organizations empowering their workers to be able to do those dynamic risk assessments, to make judgments, to use their, you know, judgment to decide to go forward or not in the moment. But then the organization has to support them in their decisions. Managers have to realize how to discuss this and back them up too.
I mean, my rule would be this: if I trust somebody to go out and do a job for me as a lone worker, I have to trust their judgment in any situation. And if that means that they felt, for whatever reason, that it was too dangerous to do this, it was too high, it was too dark, it was too heavy, it was too sharp, it was too scary, whatever it might be, they decided that they didn't want to continue, I have to, as a manager, back up and support that judgment.
And it's relying on discretion or judgment, and that can be difficult because everybody's vision is different, but it's worth doing because then you have a more robust system.
Absolutely. Great, thanks, Mike. We'll go back to the slides now, if that's okay. Hopefully, we should be able to go back to the slides. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so look, having decided on the stopping rules, when you won't, if you're going to allow lone working, then you do need to put in paperwork. And I know this is kind of a bit of a bind, and I'll be honest, I've never bet a piece of paper yet that's kept somebody safe. But actually, it is really important that organisations have this idea of policies and procedures. So dealing with policies to start with, just think of it, the kind of the policy as being this kind of umbrella document that really outlines how you're going to manage the safety of your lone workers. And I've set out below, kind of in those bullet points, the key things that I think are really important, which people can kind of read and digest as they want to.
Yeah. Can you pull out one key thing maybe for people?
Okay, well, if you wanted me to pull out one key thing, I would say engage with lone workers and managers. You know, this is not going to work if it's just a document on a shelf gathering dust. You really have got to engage with the people and make sure that it works. And actually, that's how we also link into procedures as well. So for procedures, one of the challenges we get is because lone working covers such a wide variety of tasks, what you tend to get is people having these really massive procedures for lone working, which tries to cover every eventuality, which you can't have.
And you also then get people who don't pay attention to them because they're not going to read 300 pages of stuff.
No, absolutely. So what we suggest that you do is that you split this down into chunks and start thinking about, well, what is it that my lone workers do? What might they need to know? So, for example, if you look at this chart here, you've got kind of the lone working policy in the orange at the top. And then underneath it, you've got three different kind of procedures. One is about travelling, One is about working in the office, and then the third one is about visiting clients, meeting clients. Just for an example, and if we take an example of, say, that salesperson I mentioned earlier on, somebody that is traveling out and about by car, meeting clients, going into their premises, then I might say to them, look, you absolutely need to understand our lone working policy.
Which may lay out our core values, so give everybody the baseline communication about how we feel about lone working.
Absolutely. And then you also need to know about what we say about travelling, and because you've got a nice company car, then you need to know by car, which actually might link into another policy. We call that's our management of road risk policy, so that kind of links into another area. But you also need to know about meeting clients and going into other people's premises, and your own personal safety from that angle as well. But if, on the other hand, I've got a lone worker, say, who at the end of the day is our maintenance person, who comes into the building, he lone works when everybody else has gone home, he still needs to know that ethos and that core values that you talked about in the policy. He needs to understand, or she needs to understand, how you work in the office safely alone, what kind of equipment you can and can't use, and how you use that equipment safely, and what the rules are about being in the office out of hours on your own, which might then link into other policies around fire safety.
Sure.
So that, you know, there's all sorts of links in there, but can you see how straight away this person hasn't had to look at the travelling stuff or the meeting clients or, you know, any of that, because they're not interested, and they genuinely are not interested in other people's jobs. Just give them what's relevant to them.
So you've got this lone working policy, but you personalize it for each lone worker. You engage them with what is most, you know, affecting them, and you make it specifically relevant to the tasks that they are going to be doing in their job. Modular.
Absolutely, yeah. Modular is a great description. That's exactly what we're talking about. So look, once the paperwork and the policies, procedures are in place, then you have to start thinking about what kind of systems you have to support your lone workers. And this is becoming more and more important, you know, every single day. We've talked about flexible working, remote working, and it's really hard for organisations, A, to understand where their employees are, and B, to communicate with their employees. So there are an awful lot of kind of lone worker services, and obviously we're here talking for Everbridge, and thank you very much for Everbridge for inviting us to do this webinar. But if you think about lone worker services, when we go back maybe 10 years or so ago, they were very, very basic, and they just kind of allowed lone workers to call in if they were a problem. But they were very much reactive rather than proactive. Nowadays, the kind of systems that we see coming through are much more proactive, and not only do they allow the worker to call for help and assistance, which is a great communication tool when they can do that, in a really easy kind of pressing an OS button or, you know, something in that way, but they also provide information out to our lone workers who might be kind of quite disparate and spread around the whole geographic
So what
area.
kind of information gets spread out? Give some examples.
Okay, well, it might be, for example, you know, again, I hate to mention it, but, you know, this whole thing of if there was a terrorist attack in a certain part of the city, I absolutely would want to give some kind of warning to my lone workers not to go anywhere near it. But it could be something much more mundane. You know, we've got a health and safety issue in reception. Please don't go anywhere near it at the moment. So it could be something as simple as that. So providing information out about weather reports, maybe if I've got people travelling and there's suddenly a really bad weather front coming in, we could give that information out to them. But it also works in terms of kind of that location monitoring, and those two things have got to dovetail together. If I'm going to send out relevant information, just like the procedures, have to be relevant for the people for them to listen, I have to know exactly where they are. So the location monitoring has got a lot more sophisticated now, not just GPS, although that's a great system, but even if I have people, say, within my own building, it would be useful to know whether I've got a lone worker down on reception and then another one up on the 4th floor. You know, if there was a fire, it would be nice to know who's still in the building. So, you know, you can link these into swipe cards, entry cards, so that you know who's in the building and exactly where they are, or their expected route where they're supposed to be. And you can even use this in a way that it becomes automated, so you don't have to wait for them to log in and say either I'm okay or I'm in difficulty. It can be, you know, well, I'm expected here, and they don't log in, it kind of flags it up straight away. So can you see it's a much more kind of proactive system rather than being reactive?
These are amazing systems and can really help you control the risk to your lone workers. But I want to emphasize that although you may be monitoring staff, it's for their safety and protection. And And you've really got to think, if you're going to make these effective, think hard about how you sell them to your workers and what they're for. We have a lot of clients, their employees are wary at first. They call them tracking devices, and I don't want, Big Brother standing over me. And what we really want to identify them more, less tracking and more tracing. It's less Big Brother, more safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, the minute an organisation starts using these for any kind of time and motion study, or saying to a lone worker, well, how come you checked out early yesterday? How come you didn't work right the way through till 5 o'clock? The minute you start using it for those kind of systems rather than safety, you lose the engagement of your staff. So if you're going to do it for safety, you have to really only ever use it for safety.
Yeah, communicate it and use goodwill.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So let's go for another poll.
Yeah, let's take another poll. Here's the question. Do you currently use any lone worker device or service at present? Mike? Anything to help people? Yes, thank you, Mike. Let's see, the results are flooding in.
I love watching these.
I do too, because the numbers are flipping all over. It looks we're about 60-40. About 60% of you say no, and 40%, yes, they're using something now.
That's good. That's good. Thanks, Mike.
So you may not, and then they may not be just for lone workers. They may be for everybody in their company.
Yeah, it may well be. And I think that's really useful as well. But remember, although we're talking about lone worker services at the moment, and we're talking about lone workers today, these systems and these services can be really useful even if you're out in a team or there's 2 or 3 of you. Because sometimes I think we have to remember that we're concentrating on lone workers, but I quite prefer the term vulnerable workers. So it's the idea that, you're vulnerable for another reason, not just because you're on your own. And in fact, you may be vulnerable even if you're not on your own.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good point to remember.
Okay, so look, let's move on. We've got kind of down to this point here where we've got stopping rules, in place, paperwork in place, systems in place.
Policies, procedures. And now we're at the point, well, okay, how do we get this out? Again, communication. How do we communicate to our lone workers?
Absolutely. So guidance and training, the stuff that we do. I'm not going to explain to you why there's a pint of Guinness there, but I will in a minute or two, because hopefully we'll come back to that and that'll make more sense. But we're often asked again, can you provide lone worker training? And the simple answer is no, we can't, because it depends what the job people are doing as to what they need to be trained on. It may be that for some people, how you apply first aid to yourself as a lone worker might be really appropriate. For others, it could be about manual handling if you are on your own. For others, it could be about how to diffuse potential aggression or violence if you are on your own. And you can see straight away that we're having to build the material depending on the job that people do. But with all of those, there are basic elements that always need to be in there. So awareness of what potential risks has to sit within this training package, an understanding of what the control measures are. Really need to look at that from 2 sides, both from the organisation's point of view, what control measures are they putting in, but also what practical things can you do yourself to keep yourself safe. We need to look at that too. And then how do we report instances either where we have felt in danger or an actual incident has occurred. And it's important that we really encourage people to capture not just I've had an incident, but I had a near miss, or a cause for concern might be another phrase.
Because don't forget, all that reporting of these incidents builds a risk profile for you. So there's something that you might not have realized either at this time of day or at this location. There's more going on than I knew. But now with people willing to report incidents, you can start building up a clearer profile and then put new control measures in place.
Absolutely. So got the basics. The next thing that needs to go into the training package is what you will do for your lone workers. And when I say you, I mean the organisation, the managers. So that's around the responsibility, who is going to do, and what are they going to do. And then talking specifically about the management support, what mentoring guidance you will provide for lone workers. And again, if there is, and it would be naive to think we're going to get rid of all of those incidents, if sadly there is an incident, what kind of aftercare systems and support have we got in place for individuals. So that's around kind of what managers can do. And then thirdly, which is the real practical part of the training, is where we talk about what we want our lone workers to do. And it's really important that we set expectations. We give them powers, ability, to make decisions, as you've talked about earlier, but also those limits around what they're not expected to do. And we back all of that up with skills and strategies. So say, for example, Go back to our healthcare worker for a minute or two. They've gone into somebody else's home. Oh, for some reason, I think we may have just lost audio there.
Nicole, we can still hear you. Oh, maybe not. So we'll give Nicole and hi everyone, this is your moderator Mike Scott. We'll give Nicole and Kristen just a minute to get reconnected. It looks like they're having some audio issues. As a reminder, if you have any questions while they're fixing their audio, you can ask them at any time by selecting the questions drop-down in the GoToWebinar panel. Just make sure you submit your questions to all panelists. So we'll give them just about another minute or so just to get reconnected. So while they're getting connected, I'll answer some of the questions that are pertaining to me. So from Megan in the audience, we will be sharing this presentation. We will send it to you via email. It'll also be online in our on Everbridge.com under our resources section tab. When you go there, just select on-demand webinars, and they will have this webinar and all the other ones we've hosted before. Give it a day or so for it to be uploaded, but we'll have it uploaded when we can. Another question that came in from Jack in the audience, he wants to know, you know, the Everbridge system was mentioned, and it sounds like he's done a little research. Does Everbridge have a way of automating these processes, you know, for these type of events? So we do have a solution called incident management, and with that, what that allows you to do is, you know, for any given scenario, you know, it's hard to be prepped for every incident, you know, and every incident type. However, you know, there are certain types of incidents you are going to face, and the certain procedures you're going to have to do regardless of the incident. So what Everbridge can help you do with in our incident communication system, incident management system, is we can allow you to build out those scenarios completely and automate the workflows. Meaning, when you know, for example, you have an active shooter situation, or there is severe weather coming in, there are parties that are going to have to know about that, and certain messages and communications you're going to have to deliver. And typically, you're going to have to do that simultaneously. So whatever Bridge allows you to do, instead of having to, you know, individually call people or email people or send different group chats, it allows you to launch notifications on the fly, either from your mobile or from your desktop, by selecting the incident scenario. So if it was severe weather, perhaps, you know, a tornado, and you have offices in the Midwest, and you know, specific groups that are located in the path or in that area need to know about this information, you can automatically select that template that will have those locations pre-uploaded. You can also add some on the fly and those groups, and automatically deliver that information to them. Simultaneously, you can deliver alerts to your response teams, and you can send it based off, you know, specific skill sets, who's on schedule to respond, and any other criteria that matters and pertains to that situation. And we're going to give them just about another minute. Let's see. So while I'm waiting for them, I'm going to move on to just for, to make sure to be cognizant of everyone's time. We're going to move on to my portion for now, the Everbridge portion of the webinar. And once they are back on, we will switch right back to them. So I know we have a lot of people on the line who are Everbridge customers. We do have some of you who aren't customers and are new to us. So I'd quickly like to just go through a couple slides regarding how Everbridge can help with lone worker incident response. So let's jump into it. So ultimately, your goal is to keep your people safe and coordinate a response. So as I'd mentioned in response to one of the questions, one of the main things you want to be able to do is deliver information quickly. Speed and accuracy, of course, are crucial when it's a life safety matter. So that's when you need to automate, possible. Everbridge allows you to do that in numerous ways, including our incident management module, as well as being able to allow you to build out your specific groups. So if you have groups that you're going to need to notify or have respond to specific incidents, you can create those in advance and deliver notifications to them immediately. Additionally, when you're dealing with lone worker situations, typically they're mobile or they're in different areas than you are, of course, meaning not just in a different building, but in different geographic locations. So what Everbridge can allow you to do is send location-specific alerts where you can draw a polygon for a given area or select people in a certain region in certain groups. In addition to that, you want to be able to share that information through as many channels as possible. Everbridge is a huge believer in multimodal messaging. Obviously, you don't want to over-message people during operational incidents, but when it's a life safety matter, you want to be able to ensure that you're giving them the best chance of receiving that message. And by being able to do that, you have to send it to as many channels as possible. So that could be via text, via email, via voice call, via sending it to not just an email, but their work email or their home email, whatever information you have that's disposable at that moment. And that can even include, if it's a large-scale event that you want to just get out there, say if you're even a law enforcement agency or a state agency and you want to get information out, maybe not just for your employees, but anyone in the area, you can send information out via social as well simultaneously. And that allows you to do a couple things. That allows you to obviously expand your message to a greater audience, but also ensure accuracy through your messaging, where all your messages are going to be the same and consistent, so there won't be confusion amongst people receiving it. In addition to that, you want to minimize the impact to your organization. You need to be able to, we talk a lot about, letting people know who are in harm's way about the information, but your responders simultaneously need to know what's going on, so you need to quickly get them working on the incident. So to do that, you need to not only communicate with them, but locate them. Who's close enough to this area, but also you need integrations with your different systems that can identify specific skill sets. Such as can this person, handle this type of incident? If you're a state agency, does this person have this type of clearance? But also, who actually is on schedule? If you're trying to assemble your security team for some sort of breach within your organization, one of your campuses, what security team's on call? Who's available? You don't want to be having to look through a book or blasting your entire team in that situation. You want to be able to reach the people who are actually able to respond to that. Everbridge allows you to do that. So let me talk very shortly about our mission statement and ultimately what Everbridge, what we were created, what our vision is and what our mission is to, not only, help organizations continue running, but keeping their people safe, helping the organizations, meet their operational requirements by getting people working on incidents faster, but also when it comes down to what we're really trying to help organizations accomplish is making sure when there is harm, we're helping them get their people out of the way. So let's talk a little bit about some of the incidents that Everbridge can help with. So we're not just limited to lone worker incidents, as I mentioned, whether it's an active shooter or severe weather, or on the operational side, an IT outage or a product recall. We are leveraged by over 3,200 enterprise organizations and customers who use us for any number of these incidents. Whether it's a large investment bank in the United States, or 8 of the 10 largest cities who are leveraging us for incident management and critical event management. We can help you with these different types of incidents and help cater our solution to your organization's individual needs. So with that said, I'd like to launch one last poll to everyone still on, and ask you guys if you're interested in hearing back from an Everbridge rep to learn how you can partner with us with your organization. So we'll leave this poll live for about another 15, 20 seconds. And again, what we'll do with this is I'll make sure that one of our product representatives will reach out to you and give you some more information on how Everbridge can help your organization's individual needs and cater that towards, again, your organization, and not, as I had gone through, a very general presentation. So we'll give that just about another 10 seconds, and then we can move to the Q&A. Okay. All right, so we're going to move to the Q&A. Thank you for everyone who filled out those questions, the poll question. So we're going to start the Q&A. Unfortunately, our speakers have not come back, so there are questions I will not be able to answer, and I will conclude this webinar in just a few minutes. But I want to get to some of the questions that I will be able to answer. And what I will do for all of you still on the line, and we really appreciate your patience, I will make sure to follow up with them and have them answer those individual questions, and we will we'll post it. I'll keep you guys informed of where we'll post it in a follow-up email. So Lloyd had a question in terms of recommendations for consulting services for this type of or these types of trainings. So Lloyd, I would recommend, and I'll move the slide over to give you the information, but I'd reach out to Nicole and Kristen. They do provide these services and do work with a number of partner organizations that they can either they themselves can help you with, or can point you in the right direction. Michael wants to know, does Everbridge have any capability for man-down notification? So we do have an SOS button within our application. So what that allows you to do, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, so if I am, Michael, please let me know, and I'll try and get you the right answer. But from my understanding is with the man-down, within our application, anyone who is remote can request can push this SOS button and deliver, and that will alert the right people within their organization of their call for help. And this can be done silently. So if it is a situation where there's a dangerous person around them, they're not going to alert that person. Additionally, if that person were to see them hit that, there is a code you can put in to deactivate it. Now, with that said, you're obviously not going to want to deactivate it if there is a suspect there. So you can put in, for example, if you put in a fake code or any code other than the one that you're given, that you've assigned yourself, it will look like you actually put in the right code, so they think you deactivated the request for help. Let's look. Next question. Okay, so I think I answered the first part as well. So Michael also asked, what capability does Everbridge have for lone workers to quickly communicate back that they need assistance? So again, we do have that SOS app. Additionally, if it was a live, I'll expand upon that too. So there is the SOS button within the app that they can launch. In addition to that, if it say if it was a live situation where we know there's an active violent threat within one of our buildings, we send an alert. You can respond to those messages and engage in two-way communication. There's a couple ways that the organization can handle that. So they can send out a poll question where they are trying to see who safely exited the building and who's still stuck in there. And additionally, there are some open responses that you can send with some more information. And again, with the SOS app or the SOS button, one of the things I didn't mention that I'd like to add is once that's launched, automatically audio and video is being recorded. So if you need to keep any of that information, that will be available, and it will be automatically sent to your organization and stored within the Everbridge module. So if you guys if something were to happen, unfortunately, you would at least have that readily available.
Mike,
Nicole, have you guys joined?
No idea where it went.
Awesome, awesome. Well, given the time, why don't we just stay within the Q&A, because I know there's quite a few questions that you know our guests would love to have answered. So let's jump into that. And the first question for you guys from Don in the audience, he wants to know: do you have an example? Do you have a good example of how to develop a policy for this, or do you have any examples that you could provide?
Yeah, absolutely. Would be more than happy to. Probably the easiest way to do it would be just to give us a quick email, and I can send out some information. What we do is, rather than saying, here's an example of our policy, because remember earlier on we said it's all about your ethos, your culture within your organization. It needs to be owned by the lone workers. But what we can certainly do is send you a template for the kind of things that should be in a policy, and then maybe that will help.
Perfect. And the next question is from Lee. They want to know, should the risk assessment be carried out on a group of people, or should it be based on the individual? Okay,
so it's kind of two answers really. In the initial stages, it should be carried out on a group of people that do a particular task. But then using the PET analysis, if a particular individual worker has something specific about them, either a medical issue or they're a lot less experienced, say, than the rest of the group, you might want to bring that in as an additional piece of information about that lone worker. So initial stages, you do it on the job, the task that they're all doing as a group, but then you add in any particular issues that might be relevant to one individual worker. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep. So
good.
Lee said that's great. So one of the another question they had, I sort of answered it, but I'd rather you guys provide the answers to this as well. So from Lloyd in the audience, he wanted to know: do you have recommendations for a sole practitioners providing consulting services? And his second question was: how does one communicate for backup or assistance when they're the only person in your business?
I'm sorry. So when he's someone who works all by himself, he is the lone worker,
okay.
and he is the company.
Yeah, okay. So here in the UK, one of the things that we find is that if there are groups of people who work in the same area together, or maybe there might be associations depending on the job role that you do, they can club together and support each other as self-employed sole practitioners. That's one really nice way of doing it. And there are also some organisations, I'm sure Everbridge could do this, that would provide that support for an individual as well. But certainly the best way we found is to club together as a group, either geographically or in terms of the work that you do. So we worked, for example, with some therapists recently where they had a whole host of them that were all individual sole practitioners, but they got together and provided support for each other.
Awesome. So with that said, we're going to move on to one last question. It is an Everbridge question, so I'll answer this, and then we'll conclude the webinar. So the last question from Dora is, how does Everbridge help with IT outages, especially if there is an actual outage within the building? And so Dora, in terms of how we help, so I'll answer this in two parts. How we help with an IT is pretty simple. So basically, we have an integration with different ITSM providers, and if a ticket is launched or created, automatically, again, if you're leveraging us, a notification will be sent to the appropriate party. So meaning you might need 3 people working on it, you might need 1 person, or whatever the situation is. When that ticket's created, Everbridge has different scenarios built into it that you would configure with our teams that would allow you to simultaneously let key stakeholders know, hey, whether it's the person who who requested the ticket, let them know, hey, your ticket's been filed. Automatically a notification would go out from Everbridge. Simultaneously, they would reach out to the people that they need working on it based off skill set and based off who's on schedule and whatever criteria you want to add to that. So instead of having your organization or your employees rather log into their ITSM system and having to look through the ticketing system, this is more of a proactive approach versus them having the requirement of being in the ITSM system. In addition to that, it also helps you resolve the situation faster because not only does someone have to be logged in, but the right person has to be logged in, meaning the person with the right skill set or persons with the right skill sets. Now, if there is an outage in your building, whether it's an IT outage or an outage within it, Everbridge is a SaaS solution. So you can, and it can be. We also have a mobile app, so you can be leveraged from any device, from any location, as long as you have some sort of connectivity. Now, given, say, if there's a power outage and you don't have Wi-Fi, well, you can log on to our mobile app and launch notifications from our app using data. So with that, hopefully we answered all your questions. If you do have any other questions after this webinar, I have left up the email for Kristen and Nicole, so please reach out to them. In addition to that, this session was recorded, so we will send you out the recording and with the slides, and we will be posting a recap blog early next week, so keep an eye out for that. With that said, I want to thank our speakers,
Mike,
Nicole and Kristen.
Can I just add in there that I don't know whether they lost us before I explained why a pint of Guinness was really important for lone working. So if anybody wants to know...
No, we didn't, so definitely jump in.
No, I'm not going to tell you now, but if anybody wants to know, they're more than welcome to email us and I'll explain it over email.
We'll be drinking one now.
Well,
it's later in the day here. I just want to put that in. No, thank you for that.
No, definitely. We appreciate the session. And everyone, thank you for joining us today in the audience. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you guys in the next webinar.